Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next week in our final research project. This presentation is going to be mostly about how we can write some good introductions on our first drafts, but I do want to show you some stuff that I've included here on our final research essay resources page. Below this video, which has not been posted yet, but it'll be right here below our skeleton man, are two new things I want to bring your attention to. The first is a sample student final research essay, so you can see what we're looking for in terms of what the final product should be. I have taken the liberty of putting comments on here to outline where certain things go. You'll recognize exordium, narration, division, so on and so forth. Anyways, go ahead and take a look at this student paper. You will see where the different parts are delineated. You'll see where her central claim is. Now, of course, these are not going to be things that we've read. This was a student that took a different 1102 class from me. But in terms of how the paper should look, in terms of how it should sound, in terms of what the works cited page should look like, and in terms of my comments, which I actually took the liberty of including down here at the end. The other thing that I've posted is this presentation I gave in a slightly different form in my English 1102 class, or my English 1101 class last fall. I went ahead and I put those slides up here as a PDF. There are additional slides in this presentation that you're going to find here that aren't in this video, but this video plus those slides should give you more than enough than you'll need to write a good introduction. This is what your first draft needs to have in order to get full credit. You got to turn it in on time. That's over half the credit on this. You need to include one of these effective introductions, and if you open with a rhetorical question, a dictionary definition, or a famous quotation, then I will deduct 5 points. You got to have your central claim in there with those terms defined. Literature review, that's going to be the secondary sources that you should have. Proof section, again, watch the organizational video, and then we need to have that works cited page. So there is the credit for our first drafts of this. Those are going to be due on Tuesday night before midnight. They got to be submitted on time. I cannot accept late stuff here. And the reason why is that next morning I'm going to be distributing final drafts to everybody. Nothing that I've read or written was accepted if it had an effective introduction. It's one of the more important pieces, if not the most important piece. It's where you establish your authority, and I want to make sure that we all have a sense of how important this is. So that's what this presentation is for. No dictionary definitions, no famous quotations, no rhetorical questions. Instead, we're going to try some different tricks. I want to go over some common myths and legends and unhelpful information that students come into my classes having about introductions. That, first of all, that they're just the first paragraph. The introduction is a move that could take anywhere up to maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs. I mean, a whole book will have a full section, a whole entire chapter that is called the introduction. There are certain things, and we'll get to this in a couple slides, that an introduction must do, and until you have completed those tasks, the introduction is incomplete. It is not something that is merely defined by how many paragraphs that it is. Now, the sample student paper that I gave you, its introduction is a single paragraph, but you can see that the way she transitions from that opening hook paragraph to her narration where she sets the stakes, she's getting the job done as far as telling us what's at stake and why it's important that we know what we're going to learn from her. So get out of the habit of thinking that introductions are just the first paragraph. The idea that your introduction has to end with a thesis statement, that is also something that is not true. If your teacher, and there are teachers at this institution that require students to finish their first paragraphs with a thesis statement. If they tell you to do that, do it. But it's not always necessary. What is necessary is that those introductions give us a sense of authority, give us a sense of what's at stake, and introduce us to the primary texts that are going to be take up the majority of the space in the research essay. A lot of students kind of punt on their first paragraphs and hope that later on in the piece things will pick up. If the first paragraph is garbage, probably the rest of it isn't very good either. And from experience, I can tell you that editors and college admissions counselors and folks that are giving out money for great writing, if they can't get through the first paragraph, they don't read the rest of it. Your first paragraph, your introduction, should be the most revised and flawless thing in the paper. It really should, so do not take it for granted. A lot of students think that you have to start at your introduction. You don't. In fact, in this class, we should have been starting with our reading and coming up with ideas for how we can break down our reading and analyze our reading. I think that the best place to start is with an idea, that division, that central claim, and then have everything build out from that. And then finally, the idea that somewhere there is somebody who's good at writing an introduction. You know what? It just takes time. It takes time. It takes drafts. It takes you collaborating and bouncing your ideas off other writers. So we can all get good at this if with a little bit more practice and a little bit more explicit instruction. And I'm hoping that this is what this presentation will achieve that. So what does your introduction need to do? Well, it needs to set the stakes. It needs to answer that so what question right off the bat. You got to find some way to bring that reader in. And whatever you're writing about, it affects their life. You need to illustrate that as quickly as possible. The metaphor that I like to use is imagine that you're a salesman and you're coming to someone's door, and at any moment they're going to slam the door in your face. And if you open up and it's like, I bet you want to read literature, they're going to slam the door in your face. Right? If you're restating obvious things, they're going to slam the door in your face. But if you paint a picture, if you do something evocative, one of the strategies I'm going to show you in this video, maybe they'll keep the door open and they'll listen to you. But we got to set the stakes first and foremost. Your audience needs to know why they should care. They need to know your purpose. You have to illustrate the main point and the main idea of your writing. What is that crucial issue? What is the big idea that's going to unite your two primary texts? That needs to be shown in your introduction. You need to establish your authority. You got to show with your use of research, with your use of language, that you're somebody worth listening to. And if you're making a lot of mistakes, if you're misusing words, that's sacrificing your authority. You need to illustrate your awareness of the context and the venue. We live in a different world right now when it comes to school, when it comes to everything, right? And to ignore that, this massive cultural shift that's happened, I think would illustrate that you're not aware of the context or the venue. So you need to make sure that your audience you can illustrate that you have an awareness of their values, that you have an awareness of what's going on in the world. So what I've done here is I've given us a sample central claim. Some of us, David, if you're out there, if you're watching this, you had this idea. Some other students had this idea. I think it's a great idea. I'm going to use it as an example to launch us into some introduction samples. Here's a central claim. This would be the main argument of a research essay. Stephen King's The Feeling You Can Say What It Is in French and Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream place their characters in versions of hell that are far more troubling than any hell that came before. King's and Ellison's prisons of endless suffering include uncomfortable company, impossible tasks, and most of all, the sense that our protagonists will be there for an eternity. So this is a fantastic example of a division paragraph, or that central claim we're looking for. Up here, we have our two primary texts, Stephen King's story and Harlan Ellison's story. We have the big idea, right, which is the existence of hell. And then afterwards, we have our terms: uncomfortable company, impossible tasks, and the possibility of an eternity. So this would be the central claim for our research essay. This is where we need to start. Like I said in the last presentation I gave, this is the brains, this is the central nervous system, and you really have a hard time piecing these drafts together unless you have this argument in place. So we're going to presume that we are writing an introduction for this paper right here with this argument. So we have 10 different types of starting introductions. Facts, which are where you give the statistics. Old saw, once upon a time. Introduction, and that's when the author introduces himself or somebody else. In medias res, in the middle of things. A description of a character, a description of a setting. We can start with dialogue. We can start with a philosophical idea or a truism. There's a thing called an overture, a thing called an otherworld. I'm not going to get into all of these. The slides have all 10 samples. I'm just going to do 5 in this video right here. We're going to look at a facts example. We're going to look at a character description and a setting description example. We're going to look at a dialogue example, a philosophical idea example, and an otherworld example. I took these from a piece actually about writing fiction called Beginnings, and it's by Ann Hood. So, facts. These are startling statistics, and here's where I actually did some research, and I found something that we could match up with our hell example. According to the Pew Research Center's most recent study of religion and public life, 58% of American adults believe in hell. Of that 58%, 82% of evangelical Protestants and 82% of black Protestants believe in hell. And lest we think this belief is childish or concentrated on younger adults, think again. Adults aged 30 to 49 make up the largest percentage of the believing adults Pew polled in this study. So in this case, I actually use secondary source type 1 to give a statistic that illustrates why a discussion of hell would be important, right? Remember, we got to set the stakes. I'm not going to go over these next few, but an unusual fact would be one, and a vivid example could be another fact where we actually start with something that really happened in the world. Let's start off with a character source or a setting description. He was a tall man of considerable build with hair as brown as tree bark and breath like gasoline. You know, that's where we're describing what someone looked like. We read an essay in my 1101 class by Hanif Abdul Rakib in which he describes his car as if it's a character. This will be one of the examples that's on that slide. We have a description of a source. We have a description of a setting. In this example, what we would do is we would actually get into more detail of describing a character, a source, or a place, right? And here's where we use details. In this case, we'd want to describe hell, right? If we're going to be looking at the King and Ellison piece. Here's a dialogue. My friend Jerome, intelligent, red-blooded and American, asked me out of the blue one day, "Do you believe in hell?" This is a fun opening, and it would be almost a personal anecdote, but we would fill in the rest of that dialogue. Truism, philosophical idea. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. That's Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Here's an example of this from Jean-Paul Sartre. In his classic existentialist play No Exit, one of Jean-Paul Sartre's eternally damned characters says, "Hell is other people." And then we have the opening for Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. Again, I'm zipping through this because I don't want to take up any more of your time, but these are also in the slides, not the hell ones though. Otherworld, this is my favorite one so far. The Metamorphosis opens up with an Otherworld opening in which Gregor Samsa wakes up and he is a cockroach. The dead human awakes, confused, disoriented, and hot. The flames lick at her from all sides. The pain is unbearable, and there's nowhere to go. After staggering about in her new eternal suffering for God knows how long, she meets the man himself, Satan, master of darkness, our heroine. For whatever transgressions, she is in hell. But is this what hell is really like? Where did we get this idea, and how could hell be something much worse? So in this example, we open up with presenting our audience a new world, something that's completely different. And then you can see with this second paragraph right here, we start transitioning into the discussion about hell. So, in sum, you need to make sure that your introduction is a hand you are extending to your reader. You got to set the stakes, you got to set the tone, you got to establish your authority. I want to see you use one of these introductory types in your first draft. I can't wait to talk to you guys about them. Have a good week. We'll talk soon.